Good afternoon. On behalf of the Department of Geology, Geography, and Environment, I'd like to welcome you all here to the Dune research presentations. We are live streaming this on Zoom, so we'd also like to welcome our on Zoom audience. And that's one of the reasons that we're going to be using microphones today to make sure that everybody in the room and outside of the room can hear. These Dune research presentations are brought to you by the first year Research in Our Sciences course and program. And that's a mouthful, so we say the FIRES course and program. And so we have first year students who have been doing research this semester on interesting questions related to the dunes. And these research teams are going to be presenting their results. These research teams have been mentored by more experienced students in our department who are also available in the room and available for questions afterwards. We're supported by our department, by Calvin University, by some funding from Michigan Space Grant Consortium, which provides the funding for the travel to the dune sites, by the Geology Enhancement Fund and the Vermeer grant within the department that provides some funding for the FIRES research mentors. So you're really seeing the results of what a community is producing. But for this time period, we'd like for you to be able to enjoy and to learn about things that are happening at the dunes. Now, you may or may not have, I see some people, I forgot to bring mine up, have a yellow sheet with you. We have a feedback form and we'd love to hear some feedback. Emily is holding out her sheet there, and we might have a mentor or two that might grab some sheets and just pass them down the rows. You can provide some feedback on individual presentations, or you can listen to a whole bunch of presentations and provide some overall feedback. You can do that on the yellow sheet, or there's a QR code there, so you could just do that on your phone as well. There's a simple form for that. So we'd encourage some feedback, and we'd also encourage some questions after each presentation. So we'll have some time for that. We're now going to ask our first group of presenters to come on up and get yourself arranged. And I will have each team introduce their own topic and get into their presentation. But I'd like to invite you to join me in welcoming our first research team and what they'll be talking about.
So
Introduce yourself. There we go.
So our presentation is on impacts of unmanaged trails and sand movement on dunes at Hoffmaster State Park. And I am Michaela Goodrich. Over there is Lucy Keeson. This is Renata Laird. And over there is Mia Powell. To start us off, our research is about human activity, how human activity on sand dunes impacts natural processes. And this leads to changes in the way that sand moves and the dune's stability. Now, previous studies have shown that human presence in management decisions significantly influence the dune's processes and vegetation structure along the Lake Michigan shoreline. And building on this understanding will help us manage these dunes in the future. Now, our research question is, how do humans affect sand movement on the Foredune and First Dune Ridge where the trails meet the beach?
Our study area for our research project was PJ Hoffmaster State Park in Muskegon, Michigan. And for this project, we focused on dunes 4, 6, and 7 and the unmanaged trails on those dunes.
For our study objectives, we set up sand traps and erosion pins to identify the sand movement, and we set those up on unmanaged trails, crests of the dunes, and disturbed areas of the Foredune and First Dune crest. And then we numbered and mapped unmanaged trails that we could find and mapped a profile of each dune to see the overall shape of the dunes, which you will see on another slide.
For our first objective, we set 9 erosion pins on each dune. And for those 9 erosion pins, we set 3 on each unmanaged trail, and we had the 3 unmanaged trails. So we set 1 on the edge of the trail, 1 in the vegetation, and 1 on each trail. And then we had 2 sand traps on each dune. There was 1 on the foredune and 1 on the first dune crest. And then we mapped out the sand traps and the erosion pins using GIS mapping triples. For our second objective, we used lines to map out the length and the location of each trail. And then we mapped out the vegetation using the green polygons. And for our last objective, we made a profile that started at the shoreline and went to the first dune crest of each dune. And we measured the distance on each dune using the measuring tape. And we used a stadia rod and hand level to measure elevation.
For our first results, we have the foredune disturbance. And as you can see, the orange is high human disturbance. So you'll see that mostly dune 7 and dune 5. And the light green is little human disturbance. So you will see that in between dune 6 and dune 5. And the dark green is no human disturbance, which you really only see in front of dune 6. And this shows us the amount of human traffic in our study area.
Our second result is on the surface change of each dune. Through the 9 set of erosion pins, we could tell how much sand has moved throughout each of the weeks. The different colors on the graphs represent where the erosion pins were set up, with green being in vegetation, light green being on the edge of the trail, and orange being on the trail. The orange was shown to move the most on dunes specifically 4 and 7, which shows high amounts of sand movement. However, there was not significant enough changes for us to determine if it was human impact or if it was wind erosion. Our next result is on the unmanaged trails of each dune. We mapped out each of them for each of our study areas with the amount and also the length and the width of each of the trails. The dune that had the most trails is dune 7 with 22 trails, and there are several very wide trails as well on this dune. Dunes 4 and 6 show about the same amount of trails. However, dune 4 has wider trails than dune 6. This shows higher human impact through trampling on that specific dune. Dune profiles were also taken for each of our study areas. With each of these side profiles, we were able to see erosion and deposition of the sands. Erosion and deposition can be caused by human impact or through wind erosion. Our research team noticed greater amounts of erosion on dune 7 compared to dune 4 and 6. Our final result shows the daily changes of winds throughout the study. The wind speed graph includes the threshold for the sand to be able to move. The direction of the wind is also labeled below the graph, with northeast being the most prevalent. The wind fell short of the threshold on most days. However, this could still be connected to the minimal sand movement on the erosion pins, as well as the sand collected in the sand traps. Sand was mostly collected on dune 4's dune crest and dune 7's foredune, which has little to no vegetation.
These results suggest wind is the dominant force shaping dunes at Hoffmaster State Park. Vegetation proved highly effective at stabilizing sand on dune 6, showing its importance in dune management. Because natural forces drive most of the erosion, park managers should focus on preserving and enhancing vegetation cover. This understanding can guide restoration strategies like targeted planting or limited access to sensitive, sparsely vegetated dunes. Allowing natural regrowth in unmanaged dune areas can help maintain dune stability. As climate change brings stronger winds and shifting weather patterns, understanding the relationship between vegetation and wind becomes even more critical. Using this knowledge, Hofmaster and other parks can design management plans that protect dune systems while still allowing public enjoyment. Overall, these strategies help ensure that dune environments remain healthy and stable for the future. Although human activity does influence sand movement, our measurements, especially the minimal change in erosion pin data, indicate that wind is the dominant force driving dune erosion at Hofmaster. Dune 7 showed the most impact, followed by Dune 4, and Dune 6 was last among these, which aligns with higher levels of trail use and less vegetation on Dunes 7 and 4. Sand traps captured far more sand on Dunes 4 and 7 than on Dune 6, reinforcing that these dunes experience more movement overall. Large amounts of sand collected in traps and the limited evidence of trail erosion suggests that wind rather than foot traffic is the primary cause of erosion at Hofmaster State Park. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have some time for questions, and we are going to carry the mic around to the audience. So just raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll get to you as quickly as we can.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is about the trail system. And did you observe any like wildlife on the trails, like deer or others that might also, when humans aren't there, contribute to part of the trail degradation or use? I know you've cited wind as the major factor, but just curious about that. Thanks.
Yeah, so we did notice occasional animals here and there throughout our study, but we did not actually see much of any wildlife while we were at the dunes ourselves, especially since it was very cold and rainy on most of our study days. However, we do believe that if there is any impact done by humans, we also assume that animals have also probably caused some of that sand movement.
Go ahead. Yeah. So in your initial assessment, you looked at 4 dunes, but then you chose to work with 3 because they evidenced human disturbance, whereas Dune 5 did not. How did you actually assess which ones exhibited human disturbance in advance before you started looking at sand motion as opposed to ones that didn't?
We chose our dunes because these were our general study area that we were given to begin with. However, we did observe human impacts on the dunes, whether people that were there while we were studying or just leftover impacts that we see afterwards. That's our main, that was what we decided was our main clue that these were having these impacts on these dunes. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. You can simply say visual inspection, and that'll shut me up.
There was trash noticed in between some of our study
Oh,
areas,
that's
so that was another
criteria.
thing that we didn't
Yeah.
mention.
Yeah.
All right, let's thank this research team. And in the transitions between presentations, the audience is going to be invited to do something that we do in class, which is to do a mid-class stretch or an in-between presentation stretch. We usually try to tie this into something that we've been talking about. And so with this first presentation, I'd like you all to stand up and imitate what you think sand moving looks like.
Yeah. Wait, just again, it's kind of see, like a little bit slow. Oh.
And we do still have some people arriving, it looks like. So if you see somebody at a door and you've got an empty chair beside you, maybe wave them over to you. We're going to go to a very different topic for our second presentation. We're going to be moving out of that open sand area into more of a forested area, and I'll let this team tell you what's going on here. So let's welcome our second team.
Good afternoon. My name is Betsy Perez, and this is Micah McKenzie, Haley Sheehan, Jacob Kissinger, Peter Baima, and Jonathan Solis. And our group investigated tick ecosystems on Lake Michigan dunes using a transect-based study on the backside of dune slopes.
Little introduction, ticks are affected by environmental conditions. These conditions affect tick population as well as how they're distributed in an area. However, there is a knowledge gap on how actual dune topography and dune habitats affect these environmental conditions. Our study investigates dune environments on the West Michigan coast and how they relate to tick densities.
For our research studies, these were the studies where we collect our actual research, and with North Ottawa being the outlier of our research, as you can see labeled blue, with the medium tick density in both Kirk Park and Olive Shores at the lowest end, with Kirk Park being green and Olive Shores being labeled as red, with Kirk Park having the lowest tick density and Olive Shores with the highest tick density.
For our objectives, we recorded dune topography and elevation along the transect, and we analyzed soil type, moisture content, and grain size, and we provided insight to what environmental features of the dune affect tick densities.
Our methods. Data was observed North Ottawa dunes on October 23rd, at Olive Shores on October 30th, and Kirk Park on November 6th, 2025. We based our methods for our three main objectives to record dune topography, measure soil types, and plant characteristics. So record dune topography, we used a Cydia rod, hand level, and compass to measure elevation change, and GPS devices to point our plots along the transect. To measure soil types and characteristics, we performed Rubin tests on each soil sample using water and soil. We used water and soil identification charts to identify the type of soil. We collected samples in tin containers as well to analyze moisture content, texture, and sand grain size using a mechanical sand grain sieve. Plant characteristics were measured by throwing quadrants randomly near our soil sampling sites and counting plant density, as well as using a ruler to measure the plant and leaf litter height. Our points were marked at every change in elevation along the transect, and soil samples were taken at 10 regular intervals on each transect, and that was done at all three locations.
Our results from the transect data showed that Olive Shores, the area with the highest tick density, had the steepest rising slope face. It is marked in blue on the graph. It also showed that Kirk Park had some very unique features. Kirk Park is the area with the lowest tick density, and these unique features is that it had a dip just at the base of the slip face, as well as a leveling out about halfway up the slip face, which was very unique and pretty interesting. The last bit of data was that North Ottawa Dunes was the largest out of the three dunes, as well as the tallest. Although it does have the most inconsistent, it has a couple of hills and valleys leading up to the actual slip face. As well, however, it does match in steepness later on with Olive Shores towards the end.
As you can see here, this is our graph representing soil grain size, where our percent passing is on the side. And as Kirk Park and Olive Shores move pretty unanimously and have finer sediments, North Ottawa is our outlier with coarser sediment. And the way that we chose these three specific samples were at each site, we looked at all of our samples and we took the soil sample from the location with the highest leaf litter density. And ironically enough, both of Olive Shores and Kirk Park had about an average 7 centimeters of leaf litter, whereas North Ottawa, our outlier, had about 3.6. So we're seeing a suggested correlation between leaf litter and soil grain size. And also we believe this is due to microbial activity and finer sediments already having a higher microbial activity and retaining the already present leaf litter, creating a cycle. And through other studies, we saw researchers finding additional correlation between leaf litter and tick populations.
So for our discussion, the results from all of our methods are that at North Ottawa Dunes, there was a moisture content average of about 31.195% of the weight was moisture, as well as a 3.6 centimeter leaf density. And the soil texture was mostly loamy sand and some clay mixed in there. And the plant count with the quadrats was 30 plants, and the average height of those plants was 7.6 centimeters. And then Olive Shores had a 10% moisture content with average leaf litter density of 6.93 centimeters, also mostly loamy sand and clay. And there were 7 plants in those quadrats with the average height of 16 centimeters. And then for Kirk Park, the average moisture was 7.781%, and the average leaf litter density was 7.05 centimeters with loamy sand and clay. And we got 14 plants averaging 18.8 centimeters in these quadrats.
All right. And to conclude, we found Olive Shores had the highest tick density, and it had the second deepest leaf litter, had the steepest slope. And Kirk Park had the lowest tick density, but yet the deepest leaf litter, had a slow rising slope, but it had a divot at the bottom of the slope, which caused the high leaf litter. And North Ottawa had medium tick density, had the longest slope, and was slowest rising, and then rapidly rose about 75% through. And to sum that all up, we found that across the 3 sites we visited, the steepness of the slopes rose as we went to areas with higher tick densities.
These were the studies we used, and we would like to give a special thank you to Professor Will Miller, who provided us with his unreleased tick data.
And for our acknowledgements, we'd like to thank the Ottawa County Parks for giving us access to 3 of their park sites and letting us go in restricted areas. Our mentor, Nick Zwiers, for his valuable contribution and mentorship. We'd like to thank the Michigan Space Grant Consortium for sponsoring and supporting our research. The Department of Geology, Geography, and Environment at Calvin University for providing facilities and equipment. And last but not least, Professor Deanna Van Dyke and Fires Coordinator Zachary Lindenmulder for his help with our research setup and resources.
We have time for some questions.
You mentioned that the highest leaf litter density had a dip at the bottom of the dune. Do you think that the slope of the slip face affected how deep the leaf litter was?
Most definitely, and we saw that throughout our studies, but the 3 places we chose with the highest leaf litter density, none of those were at the base of the slip face, which is really interesting. We saw more consistent deep leaf litter, but the deepest leaf litters were along the slip face, not at the bottom of it.
So I was kind of interested in that you kind of concluded that ticks prefer dunes with kind of a higher slope. Do you think you could like maybe give an explanation as to why this phenomenon may occur, or do you think you not have enough information to make a conclusion about that?
I think we can say that higher slopes and the steepness block out more of the wind that come off of the Michigan Lake Michigan, and so these slowing down the wind allows leaf litter to accumulate and not to be dispersed over a larger area, giving us those thicker leaf litter or deeper leaf litter, which I think
Kind of makes like conditions for air, it makes better places for just ticks to stay and.
yeah,
eventually
those
fly.
creating microclimates, so to speak.
So you mentioned that you visited a different study site each week, correct? So do you know, did you witness any impact from the time scale that had on your research of it being later weeks for some of the sites than others in terms of like the leaf litter accumulation?
So we definitely discussed how it being fall, the leaf litter is obviously going to be higher, but also it was 3 labs within 2 weeks, meaning we obviously didn't get to see how it progressed over time, but we do want to acknowledge that the leaf litters were probably pretty similar because it was within 2 weeks and we're getting kind of the same like falling of leaves throughout the fall, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Might as well, right? Yeah. Let's pick on all these people. There's someone else. No? Okay. So, what I'm impressed with, in just kind of walking around in the woods is that a lot of times tick populations are higher where there are animal vectors to transport them in. Are there correlates of those? This is sort of getting back to the question up there. Are there correlates of animal vectors with, the steepness of the slope there or plant cover, or whatever? Did you notice like animal trails or anything that might correlate to all that? I'm seeing heads nods. That sounds very interesting and scary, both.
I would say yes, specifically olive shores with the highest tick density. I personally noticed a lot more squirrels present in the area. That was just a visual observation I made. We weren't really going in to study game trails or anything like that. But I definitely think that dune topography could help facilitate specifically squirrels, because we saw a lot of squirrels. Create those animal vectors for these ticks.
Yeah. Any role for deer?
So these are protected areas. So as we were walking on the trails throughout the slope to even get where we needed to go, I noticed a lot of deer tracks, a lot on the trails too. It looked like the deer were using the trails just as humans did, which is pretty typical. But I saw a lot of deer tracks. We didn't see any deer while we were out. We did see a group of turkeys. That was pretty cool. But
Which researcher won this year with the most ticks on them?
do you want to hear something crazy? We didn't see any ticks. No, we crawled around on the ground at Olive Shores, the highest tick density, for like, our mentor Nick was laying on the ground. Nothing.
Pretty serious experimental technique.
going on. All right, well, that gives me an idea for our next stretch. Let's thank this group of researchers again. And while we're transitioning, you can either for your stretch imitate what you think a tick acts like, or a researcher who's looking for ticks. So focused on the technology here that I missed all the great tick imitations. I just want the Zoom audience to know you can do these stretches at home as well. We're going to, there we go. We're going to head back out into a more open dune environment with this next research presentation. So let's welcome our third group.
All right, we had blowout activity at Hoffmaster State Park. I am Cohen Schneider.
I'm Nancy O'T. I'm Baby Morissette.
And I'm Ian Emil Camp.
Over the last couple of weeks, we have had the privilege to study a blowout at Hoffmaster State Park, located in Muskegon, Michigan. Our research has focused on a Pacific dune that has recently lost its foredune. We have found that with the lack of a foredune, it causes changes within the blowout area. Throughout our time at this dune, we have used topography and also focused and paid attention to the sand movements. And while we were out there, our research question was, how do blowout features and topography affect sand erosion and deposition? And our three objectives were: 1, to record blowout characteristics; 2, measure dune activity; and 3, to investigate relevant variables.
For each of these objectives, we chose a few methods to measure. First, for recording blowout characteristics, we used GPS to map points of interest. This included the crest of the blowout, the actual blowout area, and our equipment locations. In addition, we used a total station to map topography or shape of the blowout. And then measuring dune activity, we use erosion pins, such as the one in the picture, to collect information about erosion and deposition across certain areas of the dune. And then sand traps were used to measure sand movement in the wind. And we also investigated relevant variables, including wind data provided to us by Professor Van Dyke, and mapping vegetation in order to see how these variables impacted sand movement over the blowout.
All right, so up here we have the map from the total station. It's a regular topography map with more of heated, warmer colors being higher and colder colors being lower. Some notable things about this blowout. it's facing towards the southwest and towards the lake. This picture up here is kind of to give more of a physical reference as if you were there to kind of see it. You kind of got a little bit of a bowl down here. There's been a tiny bit of buildup before it kind of goes back down before then going back up again. On the map here, you can kind of see that the highest point is just off the center over here. And the main features that I'm going to point out are there are two walls on the ends. One wall, the south wall over here, very steep. It has a lot of vegetation, the roots really holding the sand in. It's a lot steeper. It's pretty hard to climb. I fell about 2 or 3 times trying to climb up it. And then on the other side is a lot more gradual slope with lots of sand built up from just regular deposition of wind blowing in. And then we got the slip face behind it. You can kind of see the majority of vegetation is up here holding in this wall. Wind data. This is the wind data that was collected by Professor Van Dyke during our research. We have the bars here show the max wind speed for each day of the 2 weeks we were studying, along with the main average that cuts through the days. You can definitely see that in the second week, wind was a lot higher, which really starts to show on some of our other graphs with the erosion pins and the sand traps. With a lot higher wind, there's obviously going to be more sand movement. It's just, 2 weeks of research. Usually you'd want about maybe 2 years or something. A lot more time to really see how everything is affected and the dune systems really work. But definitely a lot higher. Pretty varied in terms of direction. Usually it would get stuck in one pattern and kind of stay that way, like here in the east or beginning with the northwest. Overall, it got a lot faster towards the second half.
So our erosion pin changes. In general, we found that the areas in the center of the blowout experienced a net erosion. And to the north, we found these areas experienced net deposition, but the southern arm didn't have much change overall. And again, with the increasing wind speed over the second week is very present in the data from the second week for the erosion pins. In our sand traps, what we found from the sand traps was that the wind is picking up sand from the beach and carrying it over the blowout. And we again found that the second week had much higher amounts of sand in the sand traps than the first week, again correlating to the increasing wind speeds.
And while we were out there, we discussed that sand cannot be deposited on the south ridge because of the way the dune is facing. And we also discussed that the dune is getting enough sand supply from the beach with no foredune. And lastly, we also discussed that vegetation is helping keep parts of the dune in place.
From these discussions, we came to the conclusions that this is an active blowout. It's getting a decent amount of erosion and deposition coming in through the mouth of it. Mostly depositing on the north wall up here, with it being very loose and very gradual, and not as much on this side as there's not much bare sand there. It's really getting held in place. The vegetation is allowed to grow a lot more and kind of get a lot more thick on this side as there, isn't much sand piling up, blocking it. With the dune facing southwest, southwest, the majority of winds from the lake are going to blow into it from that direction, and they're going to end up depositing on that north wall.
We have time for some questions.
I'm gonna ask a question from every group. It's my,
Please do.
that's my goal. Yeah, so, first of all, you, at the start, you said the area had recently lost its foredune. So you know what happened there? There's a second part coming up too, yeah.
We aren't entirely sure. Usually it's because of changing like lake levels, which we didn't really focus on that in this study, so we don't have any more like follow-up data, but usually it's the lake levels that come and they kind of take the sand away, and without the foredune, it's kind of let wind take its course and kind of open up that ridge that's there.
So you knew it had recently lost its foredune then from prior measurements that maybe another class had taken in a prior year? Is that the case?
Yeah, that's the case.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. And the second is, could you get any hints that there would be a new foredune being established or in process there?
Yeah, we didn't see much deposition directly in front of the blowout, but along the sides of the rest of the dune and along the beach, I noticed quite a bit of deposition and spotted some incipient foredune activity.
Thanks.
I'll go to the next question. During your research time on the dunes, did you also you mentioned that like a 2-year time would be great to observe all this, and I agree. But during the time that you looked at this dune, was there human activity on it as well? Did you see evidence of that? Did that disturb your dune? Did you have to board off your dune or for anything, or how did that look? How did that work out?
I mean, our dune was really far south from any like where the visitor center was or where the main parking lot near Dune 7 was. So minimal human impacts from other people. Obviously, we were impacting a lot. I felt like I had knocked a bunch of sand into our erosion pens at one point. Maybe skewing the data a little bit, but overall, nothing besides us that we really saw, besides maybe the passerby taking a nice stroll on the beach.
Sure. Thanks. Did you see any ticks?
No, we did not see ticks.
Not gonna mess with this question. All right. Were there any times when you went out that you could see any visible differences? I know that, like from the wind data, that there's quite a spike towards the latter end of the study. You either tell without looking at the pins that you were using?
Not really. We couldn't really have that much of a visual difference. Obviously, you see the pins, they'll tend to be a bit more buried, and then your sand traps will have a lot more sand in it. But you don't really notice that much of a difference, especially in such a short time, because they're only adding centimeters to millimeters, not that much difference. Though the one week where we had a lot of wind, I do remember we'd have our equipment set up outside the dune, and it basically created its own little mini foredune just with how much sand it built up. I'm still picking sand out of my backpack. But there's definitely a lot of sand movement, and maybe if in like, 2 years, it looks way different, but over the time we're there, there's not much change. Like, you can see.
All right, so as we transition on to the next group, well, we've had a dune here that's got a lot of sand and maybe not a lot of vegetation, but I think this is still a good time to do a beach grass stretch. So stand up and wave your arms as if you're beach grass waving in the wind. We're going to still be in Hofmaster State Park, but move basically from the blowout a little bit further into the dune system, and you're going to be hearing about a rare species. So let's welcome this next group.
Okay, thank you. What's up, everybody? Our group, it consists of Asher McNeil, Alicia Steinman, Ivy Reese, and me, Willem Klopp. And our presentation today is on Cirsium pitcheri and its relation to unmanaged trails.
So what is Cirsium pitcheri? Well, Cirsium pitcheri, commonly known as pitcher's thistle, is a threatened species endemic to the Michigan sand dunes. It has a lifespan of 7 to 8 years. It likes a moderate amount of disturbance, usually in the form of sand displacement, and it flowers and distributes its seeds once at the end of its lifetime. Unmanaged trails don't really have a definition, but our team came up with one so that we could all say, oh, that's an unmanaged trail when we were out in the field. The definition we came up with was that unmanaged trails are trails that are unintended and are made by animals or visitors rather than planned for in the dune management system. These are often full of erosion and sand displacement on and near them. When we started this project, we had a research question, so why we are doing this research. These questions were, how does sand displacement caused by unmanaged trails affect C. pitcheri population health? And how are C. pitcheri affected by their distance from an unmanaged trail? And off of these research questions, we came up with 3 study objectives: to map C. pitcheri, to measure the sand displacement caused by unmanaged trail use, and to investigate the relationship between C. pitcheri and unmanaged trails.
Okay, our study area. Now, we had the pleasure of being in the beautiful state park, PJ Hofmaster State Park, and on Dune 5 in specific. So here you can see the image of the whole entire thing. It's a pretty big dune. We couldn't really cover it all, so we kind of just cut it off right there. And that's what you can see in this. This inverted piece is the area that we went to, like the extent of where we went to with our erosion pins and our searching for pitcher's thistle. And then this area, this smaller inverted area, is about right here. And this is a pretty important area because it's like sort of a blowout. It's on the leeward side of the dune in the front here. But this is the area where we specifically looked for pitcher's thistle. So we kind of narrowed it down so that we could get like a more accurate representation of the actual number of pitcher's thistle there. So yeah. Okay, and then our methods for
doing our study. The number one, most important, mapping Cirsium pitcheri. And the variables were the location, of course, and we used our Trimble GPS units. The second one was measuring the sand displacement caused by these unmanaged trails. So the variables for this were like surface change, so that being like slope angle or how wide the trail was, and also where the unmanaged trails were. So we used erosion pins to measure these as well as the Trimble GPS units. And then for the third one, it was looking at the relationship between the unmanaged trails and the pitcher's thistle. And so in order to do this, we looked at trail location, of course, the density in relation to the trail location of the pitcher's thistle, and then also the leaf length of the pitcher's thistle. So looking at the health based on the distance it was from the trail. In doing this, we used our awesome Trimble GPS units, really sweet, GIS analysis, and the folding rulers.
All right, now that we know what we did and where we did it, let's talk about results, what we got. And so these maps might look familiar. They're our study area again. On the bottom left, we have our entire study area, except we have our data on it now. So you can see these black lines here indicate the unmanaged trails that we found and mapped. These green dots you'll see around are the areas in which we mapped pitcher's thistle populations. And these golden stars are those erosion pins, which we'll circle back to later. And then on the right over here, we have that smaller area, which is again blown up, and you can see much of the same data, except these purple spots now represent a single individual pitcher's thistle plant that we found and mapped. Circling back to those erosion pins, we had 10 in 2 sets of 5. We had one that was far away from the trail a couple of feet and some that were nearer within a couple inches of the trail. And these is the average change in height across our study period, indicating either deposition or erosion. And then also circling back to this qualitative scale we mentioned earlier for the trails, it is displayed here with 1 being the lowest and just a small amount of visible sand displacement, with 5 being a large, deep trail that has no plant life whatsoever effectively. And then some various scaling pictures we use to kind of keep things consistent. And here's our first graph in which we are plotting the correlation between leaf length on average of a population of pitcher's thistle versus the minimum distance, like the shortest possible distance of that population to an unmanaged trail. You can see there's a negative correlation here. So the further you are from the trail, the shorter the leaves are on average. And then finally, we used this map, which you are becoming very familiar with, and we made a heat map or a kernel distribution to find patterns in where the Cirsium pitcheri were more likely to cluster up. And you can see from this yellow band here that there's definitely a correlation. And when we overlay contour lines, you can see that that is on the leeward slope of this dune here.
Okay, so we talked about what we did, how we did it, and our results. And I'm here to talk to you about what any of this actually means. So as Asher just mentioned, we have those erosion pins, which we placed directly on the trail and then a couple feet away from the trail. And with these erosion pins, we are able to see that the sand is moving or eroding off of those unmanaged trails and into the rest of the dune environment. And when we look at our qualitative scale, we're able to visually see this, where the sand is moving off of these trails. And when we look at that, our data that we displayed about 2 slides ago, you'll see that the pitcher's thistle in relation to this, to these unmanaged trails, is in this depositional area where it's farther from the path, where the sand is moving. And based on, as we talked about, the leaf length, we can see that it's also healthier in these farther depositional areas. And again, we have this heat map. So talk about this heat map. We have these dots here, which are our pitcher's thistle, which were mapped. And first, I'd like to draw your attention to this right here. So you can see that there is a little bit of a little bit of heat in this area. And these are our unmanaged trails that you can see that were throughout this blowout area. And you can see that pitcher's thistle is relatively found by these unmanaged trails, as we discussed in the previous slide. However, if you see, there's obviously a larger portion in a different part of the map, and this was not near an unmanaged trail. This was actually in the leeward slope depositional area of our dune, and not near the unmanaged trail. And not only was the pitcher system more likely to be found in this leeward slope depositional area, it was also found clumped together. And then to conclude, we talked about how we saw pitcher thistle is found within this depositional area away from managed trails. However, we also found that certain pitcher thistle is most likely to be found in this leeward slope depositional area, which is about right here that we were looking at. However, more data is needed to understand certain pitcheri and if it prefers this leeward slope depositional area over the unmanaged trail depositional area. And then finally, we have some people we'd like to thank. We'd like to thank Professor Van Dyke. We would like to thank our FIRES mentor, Nathaniel Sung, the FIRES coordinator, Zachary Lindemulder. We would like to thank the Michigan Space Consortium and the Calvin Geology Department for our funding. And we'd like to thank Dr. William Miller, who helped us with the heat map you saw a slide ago. And we'd like to thank PJ Hoffmeister State Park for inviting us to this research. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we've got some time for some questions. We go right to Professor Sturdy.
Thank you. That's it. These presentations have all been fine. I like the way you're explaining your graphs. That's very helpful. Would you explain for me what the correlation between leaf length and plant health indicates? Because on one slide you explained, if I remember right, maybe I'm wrong, that the leaf length was shorter the further away from these disturbed areas. But that was also then later described as being a healthier plant. So is leaf length a good proxy indicator for the plant health? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible I said the wrong word or something here or there, but what we were trying to indicate was that as you get further away from these trails and start experiencing higher deposition, right? Because when you're very near these trails, you are experiencing erosion rather than deposition. As you get, I'm sorry, I just said a completely wrong sentence. When you're in an area in which you're experiencing deposition from these trails, you're getting larger leaves, which is indicating healthier plants.
Okay.
I'm sorry if that wasn't communicated.
No, I got the impression from your graph earlier that the leaf length was shorter the further away you went. And so maybe that was my mistake. Yeah.
Just real quick question, since you are doing distributional kind of analysis here with individual plants. I'm curious if you could explain or elaborate on your sampling methods for the plants themselves. Because many times pitcher thistles can be fairly small, close to the ground, easy to miss. So was it kind of a meander survey, or did you have a systematic pattern that you were following to try and find these mountain plants?
Okay, yeah, this is like my whole job. I was out there every week with the Trimble, like just looking for pitcher thistle, taking pictures, putting them on there. And the first day, like I did kind of just meander around looking for them, getting an idea of how they clustered and where they would be in relation to like bare sand areas. You know, it's kind of easier to skim over those. But I realized about like the second or third lab in that it was going to be most effective if I took like kind of a circular pattern and went like with a small circle and then kind of radiated out. And I clumped off smaller areas of that like little dune that I inverted in the color. But yeah, I did kind of a circular getting out of the circle. So kind of radiating, yeah.
Do you think, given the size of your research area, if you flew a drone that was highly accurate in terms of its locational position. Would that be sufficient to recreate then your landscape to, you know, be able to identify even more maybe of these plants for your study?
I actually thought about this, and from most of what I observed, a lot of these pitcher's thistle plants were very small. So you'd either need a very, very high resolution drone, or you'd need to be flying it low enough to the ground that didn't really seem practical time wise to me. Because then of course you'd have to go into a GIS software and mark every position nominally, at least to my understanding. So
They also like to hide underneath other grasses, so it'd be hard to see from above. But yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks. I was curious because developing methods with GPS technology, with AI, for visual recognition, using, you know, recognition software, image recognition software to find these kinds of things. I haven't applied it to this, but just curious.
that certainly would be an interesting avenue to explore.
So you mentioned that over on the leeward side of the dune, you saw a lot of clumps of pitcher's thistle, while along the unmanaged trails, they weren't as clumped. Do you have any theories as to why they were clumped in the leeward slide versus more spread out along unmanaged trails?
Yeah, our working theory, and we didn't collect a bunch of data on this because honestly, it was an unexpected result that didn't align with our hypothesis. But our working theory is that because it's the leeward side of the dune, there was a significant amount of deposition in that area, which just led to a substantially higher population comparatively to the rest of the area.
This is a bit of a general question, but through your research, did you find any correlation between dune health and the amounts you found of this endangered plant on that dune site?
Well, we weren't really technically pitcher thistle is part of the environment, so it is part of the dune health, but we were more specifically just looking at the pitcher thistle, not the full dune. Because as we mentioned, we were only really looking at up half of the dune. But if you look at where we don't have our pictures up here, but most of the pitcher thistle we found were in blowouts, but they were starting to become a little bit more inactive. Just visually, if you saw there was more grasses growing in those areas. So we could say they might be helping the health a little bit, but we can't definitively say because that wasn't our main objective.
This will need to be the last one.
This might be an impossible chicken and egg question, so you can choose to not answer if you don't know, which is totally fine. But so you mentioned this relationship between the depositional area and the higher density of pitcher's thistle, right? Do you have any theory about whether the existence of the pitcher's thistle causes the deposition to occur there, like sand trapping, or is it the other way around?
Okay, so we know that the trails cause the sand to move because people walk on them. But we do also know that plants tend to occur and help trap the sand in certain places. So it's kind of a bit of both, if you want to say, because the sand moves because of the trails, but then the grasses and plants hold the sand in as well.
There's also been some previous research done that you can read that indicates that pitcher's thistle has been found to thrive in partial burial environments. So if I had to take a guess, it'd be more of a after end of the causal relationship.
All right, we're gonna have a transition to our last presentation, and from what you've just heard, do your best pitcher thistle imitation as you are moving as directions. Great excitement about acting like a pitcher thistle. That's keeping you so excited. We are now heading back into a wooded dune environment again, and there are those ticks that we're going to be hearing about. So let's welcome our last group.
Hi, this is our presentation on wooded dunes and tick habitats. I'm Benjamin Cooper.
My name is Levi King. I'm Cole Schmidt.
And I'm Polly Zank. Jared Genthner was also a part of our research team, but unfortunately he was unable to be here today.
Sweet. Our project, we studied the tick habitats once again, so similar to one of the other groups, but we were looking at the tick habitats to find different factors that influence the ticks and what vegetation is around them. So as you heard in other groups, Michigan dunes specifically are home to ticks, especially the wooded dune areas. So on the backside of the dune are most prevalent. And the ticks do carry diseases. And so things like Lyme disease, which you guys have probably heard of from the black-legged ticks, are prevalent and can damage humans and other plant or other animal life. But then there's also other things such as the Rocky Mountain spotted fever from American dog ticks or brown dog ticks as well that can cause harm.
Yes, so our research question was, what are the relationships of soil characteristics, vegetation density, and vegetation composition in areas with known tick populations? So our objectives were to determine soil characteristics, to investigate vegetation diversity and characteristics, and to compare and contrast data between parks, especially between parks with known high and low tick populations.
So we went to 3 different sites within the span of 2 weeks. And so with 3 different visits, we went to 3 different parks. We went to Olive Shores, Rosie Mound, and Kirk Park. Olive Shores and Rosie Mound were known for higher tick populations, while Kirk Park was known for lower tick populations. So you can see over here the 3 different locations in West Michigan that we went to. The data from the ticks is from Dr. William Miller, and we don't have specific data because it is currently unreleased.
All right, so for our methods, how we collected these samples, what we did is we chose sampling sites along parallel to the slip face of the dune, as you can see represented in these places. And along each of these parallels, we would go every 25 to 50 meters and we'd place a quadrat. But as you can see with some of these, they curved. So as you look on Kirk Park, that kind of, it's not straight. Dunes kind of curve a little bit. So we had to decide like halfway through to re-angle it. But yeah, we just placed a quadrat on those different points. And for the methods that we took at each sampling spot, we had soil care. Okay, so for each of the sampling sites, we determined 2 different things. We determined soil characteristics and vegetation characteristics. For soil characteristics, we determined the surface cover. So we determined the percentages of what soil was popping out, what the leaf litter was, and what the vegetation, so how much covered the area in the quadrat. For grain size analysis, each sampling site, we determined the sizes of the grains, and we used the sieve to do that. And for soil texture, we did something called the ribbon test. So we would take a handful of the soil and we would place water in our hand and we would see how well that held together. And that would determine if it was loamy sand, if it was clay sand, if it was all these different things. For the vegetation, we determined the leaf litter height. So we did that by placing a ruler in the ground and seeing how high that went up. And the other thing we did was vegetation types. So in a 5-meter radius around each quadrat, we determined the types of vegetation that was in that area.
So in terms of results for our soil characteristics, for grain size distribution, we used a sieve. And we took 5 samples from each of our 3 different parks and we put them all through the sieve. But unfortunately, our data did not have enough difference to be considered statistically significant. As you can see from our graph, these 3 different lines representing our 3 different parks all look very similar. So we did, however, collect some meaningful data from our ribbon test, and we were able to determine that Kirk Park was the only site that we visited with sand-based soil, while Olive Shores and Rosie Mound both had loam-based soils on average.
So the results of our vegetation characteristics. For Kirk Park, something was really interesting. So Kirk Park, as we discussed earlier, was our only low tick population area. What we found was that Kirk Park had significantly lower leaf litter height than the other parks, which we thought was very interesting. We also found that within our high tick density parks, there was a lot of northern red oaks, but what we found in Kirk Park was there was not any at all, which was also interesting.
So here's it all summed up in one little graph that you can see. So here's the Olive Shores and Rosie Mound, which are very similar if you take a look with the loamy sand or silt, pretty similar leaf litter height. The oaks are present in both of them, and then the high tick densities with those 2, while Kirk Park, which we visited last, there was a question from a different group with the ticks, the different leaf litter, which was a little weird for us because Kirk Park was our last visit and it still had less leaf litter from where we took samples from. And then oaks were also absent there.
All right, vegetation and the leaf litter were stronger predictors of the tick populations. And this was because the leaves will trap moisture into the soil, and that will alter the temperature and make it humid and provide a better microclimate for the ticks to live in. And also the tick populations were increased with the areas of higher leaf litter. And this was because that the ticks will be able to live and insulate themselves in the leaf litter, so it can protect them from the harsh climates as well as the natural predators they have. The northern red oaks were also a strong indicator of tick populations because the red oaks produce the acorns, and these acorns are what the deer and mice eat. And the deer and mice are also indicators of tick populations because they are hosts for the ticks. So they will be able to live on the ticks and thrive with them. Also, the composition of the soil will help determine the high and low populations of ticks. And because the ticks are sensitive to drying out, the sandy, loamy soils will help provide moisture for these ticks to live. The tick presence is strongly associated with the vegetation and leaf litter because it provides structure for these ticks to live and has a better habitat for them. Olive Shores and Rosie Mound both had high tick populations, and we saw that because they had also higher vegetation levels. And Kirk Park had low vegetation and it had also low population levels. And that was all matched up with information we had prior to our research. And the oak trees also had an influence on the deer and mice because they were key factors with the ticks and densities. And this is an image of a deer tick. That's one of the most common ticks in Michigan.
Yes, so before we end, we would like to thank Calvin University and the Michigan Space Grant Consortium for their financial support, as well as Ottawa County Parks for allowing us to conduct our research on their dunes. We would also like to thank Dr. Will Miller for his data on tick populations. And lastly, to thank Dr. Deanna Van Dyke, our professor, and our mentor, Sam Benkhausen, for their support and guidance. Thank you.
We have time for some questions.
Hello. Are there types of vegetation other than northern red oak that are interesting to study for tick populations?
So Jared was our main person kind of working on looking at different types of vegetation, but that was the only one that we were really noticing had clear patterns in terms of high and low tick populations.
Thank you.
This might be a question for Dr. Miller, but in a couple of presentations now, I've heard the phrase high tick populations and low tick populations. What does that mean? I mean, are we talking about 10,000 per square meter? Or what's high, 2 per square meter versus 1 per square meter? What does that translate to?
Do you guys have numbers?
We do not have the numbers. So we do not.
We don't have numbers?
It's part of data from an unreleased
What's a
study.
ballpark? What's a ballpark number? Will?
Olive Shores has double the density of the next most prevalent site, which is Rosie Mound. So on our high density year, it was 115 ticks per 1,000 meters.
Okay, 1,000 square meters.
Yep.
Yep. That's a pretty decent density. Yeah.
We collect, and that's real because we could only get a kilometer of drag in that park. So we collected 117 on that day. Yeah, not including the larvae.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting.
Given that the other tick team didn't find any ticks, I shouldn't assume that you found any. But who won most ticks?
I found one deer tick, and then that was alive, and then so like there's a couple of dead ones, but they're dead. They're not doing anything. And those are all in the logs, and the logs are really cold, all the dried out logs. And I noticed that they were going into the dried out logs to try to stay warm because of the temperature outside. Yeah.
Do you want to tell us what type of tick it was that you found?
Yeah, we found a deer tick.
Hello. Okay, honestly, I just have a question about that picture. Is that one of the parks that you were at? It is absolutely not. No, great presentation, by the way. Thank you.
Let's give this group another hand. And I'm going to say a few ending remarks, and then I'm going to have you clap for all of the groups again. Thank you very much for coming out. Thank you for your very interesting questions as well. If you have some questions that you were a little too shy to ask, find any of the students afterwards and ask them your questions. I'll also note that for our visitors, the Dice Museum, which has spectacular minerals and fossils, is open after this presentation. That's just upstairs, so we can direct you there as well. And thank you to our audience who was watching online as well. Let's give another round of applause for our